So having deep thoughts today with Lua Valentia. It's lovely to have you here, Lua. We're going to talk today about satanic ritual abuse, a subject which I suppose for occultists is both something that we kind of smile at, thinking, oh no, not again, but also, of course, has, you know, really disturbing effects in the world and disturbing roots historically. So lovely to have you here.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Talk about this difficult subject, my friend, even if we're going to talk about this difficult subject. Sorry.
No, yes, absolutely. I'm a satanic witch, a chaos satanic witch. So I believe it's very important to talk about it because as a feminist, obviously abuse is an important subject. It's a difficult one, but it needs to be addressed. So I'm glad we're going to open this conversation in a very adult and mature way because it's a meme, but also destroyed lots of families and reputations throughout the years. So we need to discuss it.
So we've kind of written down, you and I, or you've written down a few kind of staging points for our discussion. And one of the first ones that we were thinking about is, so where does Satan live? Where does this satanic panic emerge from? What are the kind of cultural containers that we find that in? And you've written down some very, very straightforward notes, because it's basically a list of cultural containers, which are very often ones that are accessible to young people. So there's a sense that this is perhaps older people being concerned, perhaps understandably so, about things that they don't fully understand. And so we're looking at music. Let's start with music, shall we? Let's start with the idea of playing our album backwards in order to listen to, yeah, exactly, in order to hear our kind of satanic message. So we've got things like,
in Brazil, for instance, we used to have this very important for children figure. She's called Xuxa, and she used to sing songs for children. And they believed that because she was very beautiful and even sensual, she would have some sort of pact with Satan, right? So if you heard her songs for children backwards, you would hear satanic message. And this is not only in Brazil, everywhere in the world you would see something like that. But in Brazil, it's particularly funny because she would sing for children. So I thought it was very interesting to bring that up.
You've got things like games. Games is another one of those areas. Obviously, the iconic example of this is Dungeons and Dragons. So absolutely. A game that involves the imagination, a game that involves, you know, Lord of the Rings style progression through dungeons and mythological landscapes. And that has been seen over the years as a great vector for infection, if you like, by kind of satanic forces. Are there particular games in Brazil and things that have fallen underneath that, been re-understood as agents of Satanism?
Well, I remember when I was a teenager that Diablo was very famous in Brazil, and people were playing all over it. And they were saying they were killing children or killing teenagers or having orgies. And some people also believe that because of the games, you can become violent and you can go around in some sort of violent spree, killing people, which is actually not true. I personally believe if you are playing a game, you are living another life, and you are kind of just living it for the fun and not going violent just because you're watching TV or playing video games. I think it actually calms you down because you have something to deal with, some kind of violent ideas, a place that you can release yourself. Does this make sense? So I think It's nonsense. But because so many games, they have, you know, the satanic, they have the pentagram or satanic symbols, the Luciferian sigil or whatever, they think it's evil and you're dealing directly with evil forces. So that's it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if we think about all these cultural containers, we think about music, games, you know, video games, or imaginative games like D&D, the books, the TV shows, the movies. That we've got sort of two things going on here. We've got people who have a kind of religious objection to the content. They believe that it is sinful. So, for example, you might conceivably be a fundamentalist Christian and think that the whole concept of Harry Potter, the whole notion of anything to do with magic is therefore sinful and therefore bad, which of course is only one interpretation and only one flavor of Christianity. There are plenty of Christians who are avid Harry Potter fans, and there's no reason that the two things can't sit together. And then there's this kind of second satanic panic, moral panic, conspiracy thing, which is that what these films or TV shows are is they are doorways into encouraging people to do some kind of abusive practice or to become part of some nefarious cult, and often with this idea that there is a huge multi-armed conspiracy out there, which, you know, is common currency in lots of different discourses, and that these are kind of entry points into this terrifying underworld that exists. It's very interesting because it can be quite, I think if you're not in that belief system, for anyone outside it, you kind of look at, I don't know, Harry Potter, and you think, what you really are genuinely telling me that by engaging with Harry Potter, the next step is some kind of like eyes wide shut, you know, terrifying. Like, is that really, like, that's genuinely a progression that you're imagining in the world? And it's uncommon, but it is nevertheless something that some people are willing to believe, and some people are willing to act on, and some people are willing to act on and then encourage people in positions of power and authority to act on. And that's where we have difficulties that emerge, or one of the places that those things emerge.
Yes,
so
there is definitely a conservative propaganda against everything that is that doesn't follow the moral principles they want us to follow. So everything that is a little bit strange or unusual, or, you know, gets into deeper or other kind of religion aspects, they will see it as sinful. And because it can be so beautiful as well, some movies about witchcraft, or it can show the witch not as a evil force, but somebody that can cure or bring knowledge or bring different aspects. People are afraid, and this fear translates to something evil, actually, because it's a lot of prejudice, and this prejudice follows with ignorance and even violence towards people who produces this kind of content or art.
I think you've picked up a really interesting point there, which is simply that if you look at the witch as the accused in either satanic ritual abuse or in lots of kind of other domains, you see a number of things. You see a fear of active and empowered female sexuality and gender identity. So the beautiful witch, like the one from the character that you mentioned from the children's TV thing, the beautiful woman, she's dangerous, right? She's dangerous. The clever woman, she's also dangerous. So the woman who is successful in her field, the woman who's a writer, the woman who's a thinker, you know, those women are dangerous. And of course, old women, the old and the excluded, the disabled and the outcast, those women are also dangerous. And if you look at the kind of the pattern of witch trials, and both ancient and modern, you can see a lot of our cultural prejudices. This is why we're really talking fundamentally about a moral panic. We're talking about a human behavior which is particularly relevant to us because we happen to be occultists, we happen to be chaos witches, we happen to be within that. But if we were black people, we would see a very similar pattern, but in a kind of a racial domain. You know, we're seeing it in terms of our identity as magicians and as occultists. But these ways of playing out moral panic, like if you're black and you look at, say, the moral panic associated with the use of cannabis, black identity, you know, we were speaking about this a moment before coming into this conversation. You can see how the same behaviors are enacted. So what are we talking about with satanic ritual abuse? Like, what is the alleged thing that's going down here? What is, you've got a list here, which is like, it's like the top 10 list of all the things that any group who wants to hate on another group says that they do.
They all think that we are highly organized, like that we have a cult, one leader, and we're taking control, and we are the Illuminati, basically. And even the IoT, because its name, can be seen as part of it. So did the devil make you do it, Julian?
Oh, what would Baphomet do? It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, if you take the example of the IoT, what you're doing there as a magical organization is you're riffing off the idea of the Illuminati. You have this kind of Discordian vibe. You have this notion of the Robert Anton Wilson thing, that you should believe that the world is run by a close conspiracy of you and your friends. You know, it's like an empowering thing. It's not about there's an Illuminati over here and they are terrified. It's not, that's kind of, you've missed the point then if you haven't got it. So a highly organized cult, frankly, in terms of occultism, one of the things that people often say is that, oh, well, you know, there's lots of abuse in the Catholic Church. And I often say, well, that may be the case. However, it's also the case that there are, I would imagine, many Catholics and many Catholic ministers who are not abusive and are completely fine. There's liberation theology in South America. There's really good things in that tradition too. But the difference between occultism and the idea of a highly organized cult is, quite honestly, we're not highly organized. Right? There's no central control. There's very little in the way of, I mean, it's not like a hierarchical system where you have like lots of money involved in this. You know, most magicians are not, like, their priority is not earning cash. You know, it's not, they need to survive, but they've got much very different value systems and it's not like, you know, we're both involved in the Illuminates of Thanateros, and we're not like you know, we don't pay anything to the guys. Like, there's no money in the organization. It's a peer organization, peer network. So it's not centrally controlled and it's not financially led. And that is a huge difference between, say, occultism as a whole and, say, the kind of organized abuses that might have happened, we know, in various other kind of religious frameworks. So what do these satanic abusers do, Lua? They've got, your list is frightening. I mean, it's kind of jokey, but it's also frightening because it's like, if this was going down, you know.
Another thing is they believe that we kill animals, that we sacrifice animals. And well, I was a vegetarian for not all my life, but many parts of my life. Nowadays, I'm a pescatarian right now. But I personally don't believe in killing animals as a sacrifice. I think there are more different ways of dealing with the sacrifice idea. Although I have to say, like, for instance, in Brazil, we have African-based religions, and this is a debate that is going on because it's very easy to point at the people who are sacrificing animals in the Black community and say, oh, this is evil. But come on, the Catholics do it as well. You know, for Christmas, that could also be considered a sacrifice. So although I'm a pescatarian, I don't personally believe in sacrificing animals. I also understand that some religions do. And I don't think we should be pointing the fingers at them. if we do want, to liberate animals and fight for animals' rights, which lots of people in the satanic community do, lots of people fight for the animals' right, we should be pointing our fingers to the companies that really sacrifice animals. It's easy to point out, oh, a satanic cult over there, while eating your McDonald's burger. So what is more evil, like a sacrificing animal and eating it to honor your ancestors, or going to fast food every day? We could discuss this moral issue here, but I think the real evil to the animal rights wouldn't be the ones using for religion acts, actually.
No, I think that's true. We can go into that one. I think you've articulated some of the real key points there. Obviously, it has to be understood that in many religious contexts, say various forms of traditional religion where animals are sacrificed, just like in ancient Greece and Rome, the animal was killed quickly, and the animal was then eaten. So, like, when we talk about the ancient Greeks sacrificing a bull, they basically slew the animal relatively fast, given the technology of the time. They then cooked it and ate it, and that's what we're talking about here. But the vast majority of occultists, certainly I know no one in the British Isles who has killing animals as anywhere near part of their practice. Most magicians, in my experience, if they use blood, use their own. Yeah. like it's and you're absolutely right. I mean, to accuse a group of doing terrible things to animals, particularly while eating meat that's been produced on an industrial scale, it's again, like a lot of this stuff, it says more about this desire to other and to harm and to scapegoat and to outsource our own the stuff that's difficult for ourselves into another group and to victimize another group. The key one, I think, for a lot of the satanic abuse stuff has got to be another point that you've written down here, which is to abuse children. Okay, so that's really one of the kind of central things. It's interesting because, of course, the abuse of children has been an allegation that's been thrown at almost every that I can think of the group who've been excluded from culture. So gay people, if you're in Russia now, there's still an understanding that gay people are pedophiles, right? That's like a thing in a lot of the kind of cultural conversation. Jews during the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s were accused of abusing children, and circumcision was shown as an example of like the kind of abusive practices that they did. So children, we love children. I've got children. There's like the children that I work alongside. These are valuable, important members of our community. So of course, to say this group are doing terrible things to those children is one of the most damning accusations that we can make.
That's horrible. Even if you get the Satanic Bible, it says that we should not abuse animal and children, neither animal nor children. So children are members that we value, we treasure. How could, anyways, it's like this actually, it's very damaging because the real abuse, what is really going on, is getting it's getting out of the question because people want to know this fabricated lies. They want to know what is sensationalist. They want the circus of the abuse. But the real abuse, usually, according to statistics, happens inside the home by a person that they know, either by their father, that stepfather, or somebody close in the family. So this is the statistics. At least in Brazil, it's like that. So
I mean, sorry, go.
No. It's very easy to say, oh, that group over there, it's worshiping Satan. It must worship Satan to be an abuser. And it's not. It's not how it happens. These are people who are considered moral to the society, you know, and they are usually the abusers.
I mean, unfortunately, this is often the case. You're absolutely right. The vast majority of physical, emotional, financial, sexual abuse of children and other vulnerable adults happens. I mean, you know, I work as part of my role is working in public buildings, and I have child and vulnerable person responsibilities, and have had for a number of years in a number of public organisations. And we know that it's tremendously easy for us to assume that that group over there that we're pointing at, for any number of reasons to do with our own politics, our own religious beliefs, or sometimes in order to take attention away from things that we may have done, away from what abusers may have done, they will point at someone else and they'll say, actually, the locus of problem, the center of the problem is over there. You can create very easy kind of clickbaity kind of material to pull the focus of attention away from where the actual abuse is happening and has been understood, and to externalize it onto this group who you can easily identify because they happen to have pentagrams and they dress in black and they do stuff that for many people is a bit unusual and strange, and so to other this group is very, very straightforward and very easy. Those kind of abuses of children, it usually has multiple layers. So it's like it will be the abuse of children physically, sexually, forcing them to watch the killing of animals, orgiastic, cannibalistic behavior. One of the big things that was important in the satanic abuse story when it emerged in Britain in the late 1980s and early 1990s was the idea that babies were being deliberately bred in order to be sacrificed, you know, which is a terrifying idea. And I can understand why people are rightly hugely concerned about this. But the thing is, if you start to pick this apart, and of course, a lot of the stuff we're talking about has been subject to many, many pieces of independent academic research to actually try and validate, like, is this actually going on? And in fact, when you start to drill down, what you find is that the idea of an organized satanic abuse ring of any description, at least in Europe and certainly in Britain, was found to be demonstrably false.
Yes.
Because we're talking about really extreme behaviors here. We're talking about stuff that, you know, not that terrifying murders and violence and abuse doesn't go on, but predominantly the vast majority of this happens within family contexts. It happens within mainstream religious contexts. And as you said, a lot of occultists, our belief system, our way of challenging culture, and the taboos that we want to break are often the taboos of repression that we have within our communities, one of which is not honestly addressing the context in which abuses happen. And that many occultists are very, very insistent on the rights of animals and children and the autonomy of people, women, you know, the disabled people, people of color, and so on, because that's actually where the radical stuff lies. It's not radical to go abusing people, because unfortunately it happens every single day. And as we're having this conversation, it's happening all the way around the planet right now. And it might be happening in religious settings, but is it happening in occult, pagan settings? The answer is, to a vanishingly small degree, no, it is not. And that's just the way it is.
Exactly. And when you ask these people, where's the proof? Where is the proof? They come with absurd lies. Like, for instance, they thought that the satanic people were traveling with portable crematoriums to dispose of the bodies. There are no portable crematoriums. They don't exist. So they fabricate all of these lies. And the proof usually are like photographs or pictures or whatever. They are drawn by psychotherapy patients. Usually they show even heavy metal album covers. Oh, look, the proof is here. is in this cover of this heavy metal, or like or is a folklore or urban legend or something like that, and pictures of animals, like mutilated animals. Sorry, I thought I said mutilated animals. So where is the actual proof? Usually when you ask that, the other people go, oh no, if you are asking me for the proof, it means you were the pedophile, you were the abuser. If you're asking for proof, it means you are evil, So many of the real cases of child abuse or animal abuse, they were obscured by these circles, by these fabricated lies. Because it's very easy, Julian. Let's say I don't like you. Let's say for some reason I hate you, right? So I come up with these lies about you. And if somebody asks me, no, show the proof, the real proof. And I go like, so you must be this or that too. This is very easy. You cannot go around accusing people just because of their beliefs.
The other thing, Laura, I think in a situation like that is you get into, there's a whole industry of victim playing, which is really, really distressing, because there are people who are genuinely abused, the people who are genuinely victims and genuinely hurt. And then, as you mentioned, that there's an industry of recovering memories. That was certainly a thing in the 1980s and 1990s. Psychologists of dubious levels of skill and qualification who were helping people to remember their satanically abused experiences. There's certainly an opportunity for people who are perhaps unable to make it in any other kind of context to make themselves a name for themselves being victims. I'm a famous victim of a terrible satanic thing that's happened to me. And interestingly, with those individuals, rather than campaigning to have legal cases looked into, campaigning to get independent legal work done, campaigning by speaking to elected representatives or any of the sort of the systems that we have to deal with justice, however imperfectly, what they often do is want to, I don't know, share clickbaity videos with their mates and get their friends to click dislike on other content being produced by people. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a sort of a playing out, often of someone who has perhaps an abusive tendency themselves or has done these terrible things, externalizing onto somebody else. And when they're asked for proof, they say, oh, well, you see, the police won't deal with anything, or the courts won't deal with anything, or this is, or ultimately, if the person pushes them, well, show me how the actual facts, show me some actual, rather than gossip and association and things you might have made up, show me actual data, then they get accused as well of being part of this great, terrifying conspiracy. And what's really interesting about this for me as a historian is that there are absolute parallels with this in the 17th century in the Basque witch trials. So in the Basque witch trials, what happened was a series of witch accusations made by people arguably with what today we would call mental illness, which spiraled out of control to the point where thousands of people were incarcerated, a number of executions took place. And the Pope at the time sent an inquisitor to go and check out what was going on. And various things happened. So they were told all the usual stuff, cannibalistic orgies, abuse of children, all of those sorts of things. And the Pope's inquisitor, a guy called Alfonso Salazar, if I remember correctly, he did something really interesting. He sat down with everyone and said, okay, so all these people have been locked up in prison. They've all gone a bit crazy. They all claim now that they were at the witch's Sabbat. And he said, well, so you would claim to be at the witch's Sabbat, do you? Yes, so that's right. I was there with the devil. We ate babies and eggs. Right. So can you tell me where you sat in relation on this table diagram to the other people in the group? And he would then go and interview those other people. And of course, unsurprisingly, the whole thing was a fabrication, a delusion, a mass panic, a moral panic. He was, of course, accused of also being in league with the devil. So the people in the Basque region said, well, the reason you're saying that there's no devil is because you're part of the conspiracy. And fortunately, he was able to unpick that. And in fact, there were then no more witch trials in that part of Europe for the remainder of the early modern period. So what needs to happen is, if there is evidence of terrible things happening, and of course terrible things do happen, then the campaign should not be to vilify and attack the people who allegedly did it, but actually to get some real stuff done, to go to the police, to go to the courts, to go to an independent legal advisor. Because even if you believe that the police and the court is corrupt, you can still hire a lawyer. You can still crowdfund to hire a lawyer to get your case for, assuming, of course, your case has any validity to it whatsoever. However, it's also possible to retreat into this playing the victim, and to make quite a reasonable life for yourself in a rather strange way, which revolves around the fact that you're just a hater, and that's your trade, being a hater, and there's no value in what you're saying at all.
Oh my God! What
How
a
sad!
Exactly. What a sad life.
What a sad life. What a sad life.
What do you do for a living? I'm a troll.
But you can see how people like the conspiracy so much that even when it's revealed to them that this is nonsense, that the satanic conspiracy is nonsense, even then they find it difficult to believe. Another historical story, the story of Leo Taxil. So Leo Taxil was a writer in France, he was a journalist. He wrote a number of very radical books, basically making fun of Catholic Christianity in the sort of latter part of the 1800s. And then he had a very public conversion to the Catholic faith. And he spent 10 years writing books about a kind of satanic, Baphomet, Freemasonic, Templar conspiracy. And he wrote loads of books. He was very successful. He got to go and have an audience with the Pope at one stage. He had religious music played in various kind of churches, which he considered, was part of the whole kind of anti-satanic thing that he was creating. He had allegedly an informant called Diana Vaughan, who was the person who was telling him the stories that he was then writing down about the terrible satanic events in this Baphomet, Freemason, Templar kind of satanic ring. And the stories gradually got weirder and weirder and weirder, and stranger, more outlandish. And then in about, I think it was 1906, 1907, he did a big press conference, and all the kind of some of the senior Catholic clergy from France were there, members of the government. And he basically said, look, this is a massive joke. You are all incredibly stupid, because you wanted to believe that there was a terrifying conspiracy. You wanted to believe this. You are so prejudiced. You are so small-minded. You are prepared to believe any number of crazed things. And to the point where the police had to escort him to a cafe, because people were incredibly angry about this. And there's actually, I'll put this with the show notes. There's a description of the whole lecture that he gave, which is, it's very, very sort of 19th century elaborate language. But it starts off with how he managed to convince someone that there were sharks in the bay, like in France. Somewhere in France, there were sharks in the bay, and he'd convinced one of the officials to get a boat to come and kill the sharks. And he thought, well, if I can do this, I can do anything. And because he was so anti-Catholic, he built this whole 10-year joke, except this, that when he said this is all rubbish, people went, ah, yes, but is that because you're part of the conspiracy? And of course, the idea that there is a satanic Baphomet, Knights Templar, Freemasonry conspiracy has rumbled on from that point onwards. Like, I've been in the Masons, right? As far as I can see, it was a nice charitable charity money raising drinking club for older dudes. That's what I saw. I didn't see any baby eating. I didn't see any lizard people. I didn't see like nefarious political maneuvering. I saw a cheap bar. I saw a bunch of people who wanted to raise money for charity. And I saw a bunch of people doing a style of ritual which was impressive and beautiful. Not really my cup of tea, but respect to those people for doing that work. But Leo Taxil does this massive joke, and the joke gets repeated and repeated, because it's much easier to go shock horror than actually go, oh, actually, this is the truth.
Yes. It's the circus movement. And it's happening again. It's happening all over again with things like Randonautica. This is the most thing going on right now, the viral thing, you know, people visiting abandoned houses, seeing all sorts of satanic movement over these abandoned houses, and trying to find something to fear, trying to feel something so hard, because usually people are bored, people don't have anything to do, so they want to feel something. What's better than to feel fear, actual fear for the unknown, you know? You know what I mean? So this actually, it is a recipe, and this recipe, the facts that helped to spread these lies, it has to do with Christianity, fundamentalist Christians. It has to do with the anti-cult movement. Oh, if you are in a cult, that's bad, that's horrible. And also it has to do with the Church of Satan. Because if you have somebody such as Vayne being public about it, saying, I'm a Satanist, and you know, how he put himself out there, people use that as a bait. They use it as to show, see, Vayne exists, the Church of Satan exists, therefore all this abuse also exists. But they absolutely don't read the Satanic Bible. They never did, because if you get a Bible, you see that the Satanic Bible, is totally against the abuse of children and animals. But you know, Vayne was there, and he was shocking the society back then. So they were using him as bait. So also there was this development of the social work as a field. And back then in the 70s, the 80s, the social workers, they were struggling to make people understand about real cases of pedophilia, you know, because nobody wants to see the statistics and see that this is happening in homes that are moral. Nobody thinks anything about them. They're your neighbors. They are good people in society. So no, let's all check those who look evil, who look strange. So that was happening. And also, as you said, the awareness about post-traumatic stress disorder, and the concept in the psychological field about repressed memories. You know, so they are trying to analyze that. So, okay, let's do it. Let's take these memories out of you. Let's deal with these repressed memories. But turns out they are all fabricated lies. So this is the recipe that originated the satanic panic. And obviously there are, we put here a timeline that we can analyze, because there were historical facts as well. Like in 1979, James Dallas disappeared. And guess what? He was playing Dungeons and Dragons. And everybody thought, because he was playing Dungeons and Dragons, that was the problem. They even made a movie about it. It is called Mazes and Monsters, and it is with Tom Hanks. The real fact that nobody was talking about back then is that James actually, unfortunately, was having problems with his sexuality. And unfortunately, he was having suicidal thoughts. So he disappeared, then he explained all that, and then unfortunately, he managed to kill himself. Again, the problem wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. The problem wasn't Satan. The problem was the repressed sexuality and the morality around it. It made somebody kills himself.
And certainly, I mean, I remember being involved in paganism and occultism back in the 1980s and 1990s, and I was involved with various kind of publishing of zines at that time. One with Phil Hine and Rodney Orpheus called Pagan News, another one that I led a little bit later with Catherine Summers, which was called Pagan Voice. And we were publishing pagan zines over that time, and we had quite a big readership. Pagan Voice at one point was doing 1,000 copies every month. And one of the things that really, I think, brought the community together was this terrifying fear of the whole 1980s, 1990s satanic panic. I mean, I didn't have children at that stage, so it didn't seem personally threatening to me. But I still know that, I remember having stuff where I lived, kind of, witch written on the floor, someone attempting to put a brick through the window. There was a writer called Gerald Suster who lost his job because he was a teacher during that time. And of course, children in I think the Orkney Islands and a couple of other places were taken away from their families with absolutely no good reason. And this was, subsequently unpicked in terms of the way that this moral panic had spiraled out of control. And it was really important for us to stand against that. Organizations like the Pagan Federation did really, really impressive work to oppose these ideas and to challenge these ideas, and also to try and be really open and say, well, look, you can come and understand what we do. Yes, the thing that's got horns that some of us might worship is not the devil. And actually, even those people, and Phil Hine was particularly good at this, people who identify as Satanists, a lot of them have better moral standards, one might argue, than a lot of people who claim to be absolutely kind of Christian. I was looking at the Satanic Temple, who of course now particularly in the United States do really important kind of radical work challenging the encroachment of religious fundamentalism into American government. And their 7 fundamental tenets are things like: one should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. The struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolate, subject to one's own will alone. So it goes through like this whole bunch of stuff, which is like boom, 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 boom. This is actually what people like us stand for. And in the 1980s and 1990s, yeah, totally. I mean, I've got friends involved in the temple as well. They do very, very good work. Yes, I understand that the iconography might be disturbing for some people, and I can understand that it's certainly weird. It is occult, it is magical, it is mysterious. The thing that attracts us to it is the fact that it has this mysterious, spooky, fascinating quality, but that's not the same as it being abusive of other people or other individuals. And you're absolutely right what you said earlier, that in that example of the young man who tragically hanged himself, it's very, very easy to point the finger at somebody else, and it's incredibly hard to prove a negative. So if the only thing you can say is, well, if you have evidence, then you must take this to the due process of the law, and if you don't, you should just shut up. But if you do that finger pointing, it makes life much easier, doesn't it? Because it means that those people who weren't able to accept that young man's sexuality, that those families who tragically were unable to embrace him in the way that he would have liked to have been seen as an individual, he felt it necessary to take his life. And it's much easier to find an explanation in somebody else over there, and to point the finger and to go, nothing to do with us, everything to do with the Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, man, no, it's not. No, you're much more likely to be abused by your stepfather than you are to be abused by some kind of like terrifying satanic conspiracy. And the fact that most of this bad stuff happens in the home, in domestic environments, and it's incredibly hard to prove. I mean, apart from anything else, one would have thought that an elaborate satanic conspiracy involving multiple individuals over many years of time would be easy to prove. Where are the bodies? Oh, they're in the mobile crematorium. I don't think they are. I think they're just actually entirely in your mind. They don't exist. Yeah.
Exactly.
What does exist is this real small-scale, nasty domestic abuse in our cultures, and trying to deal with that is very difficult. So a simple solution seems easy. Done, you know, and it's wrong.
What is abusive to me is patriarchal society, is the moral standards that we live in. It is the hypocrisy in our societies. And I think we should do some shadow work. Why I love witchcraft so much is because we do the shadow work. It's not only this blah, blah, blah of positive thinking. It's not only these moral standards that you cannot access because it's not humanly possible to be as perfect as their books say you should be. So to me, witchcraft is so important because I need to look to my shadows. If something triggers me, I need to do the shadow work. And I think as a society, we should do that as well. But obviously, when you say, oh, it's all Satan, the devil make me do it, this is a shadow problem, a society shadow problem. Because we find also, we're going to talk about that later, but we also find abuse in the spiritual centers, in the Catholic realm and other centers. And I'm not saying at any point that abuse does not happen in the occult community. No, it does happen, and I'm somebody who is so concerned about it, and I raise the voice of the real victims, especially in Brazil, that need power, that need to be heard. And obviously, we always seek for the police and lawyers and feminists and women that can help to address this issue. But the abuse in the occult community doesn't happen because of Satan or Baphomet or the devil or whatever you want to call it. It happens because it's a symptom of the patriarchal society. It's a symptom that we need to address. We need to talk about it. It's not because we worship this or that. No, because if you really look at it, we're the only ones, basically, that address the goddess, that acknowledge the sacred feminine power. So this empowers women a lot. But again, we live in a patriarchal society. So obviously, nasty stuff happens. So I just hate when you fabricate so many lies to talk about this. Because the truth is not a circus. It's more delicate than that. It's more hard to identify. It's harder to identify. But this work, it needs to be done. So it's very important what we are doing right now, talking about this in a very honest and open way. And I wish every priest and priestess also talk about this within the community. Let's not close our eyes, but also let's not let people fabricate lies. Because, sorry, just to finish my thought, because if we do let them, the moral panic is right behind the doors, is there, hidden in the shadow, waiting for the final trigger to rise again.
I think that's incredibly well put. Thank you for articulating those thoughts, sister. That's amazing, because you're so right. There's a lot of things to pick up from there. One of them, I think, is the willingness to speak about these things, and creating spaces which, in my experience, the pagan and occult community has actually done pretty well from what I've experienced, in terms of finding places where people can articulate and can talk about the stuff that is difficult. Yeah, we know that working with the shadow, working with our own experiences of abuse, or being kind of, you know, abused ourselves, that's important for us to recognize. And it's important to recognize that this is a human behavior, right? So the idea of scapegoating, this appears in Jewish culture in Leviticus, yeah, where two goats are taken. One is sacrificed to Jehovah and the other one is driven out of the city, taking with it all the sin of the community. It's very easy to scapegoat people. It's incredibly straightforward. And it's very difficult for somebody who has been scapegoated to prove that they are not guilty of whatever it is they're accused of, except by saying, again, well, if you have evidence, take it to the authorities and go ahead and do that work. Yeah, because, and we know that that's difficult as well. We know that that's difficult for a lot of people, because most abuse happens in domestic situations. It's very hard for people to evidence. So to keep those conversations open, and also to try and empower people to take the kind of legal work, because this ultimately has to be a change of culture. Yeah, it can't just be about like clickbaity articles. It's got to be a change of culture. We as a culture have to recognize this. In the work that I do, because part of my responsibility is to look after children and vulnerable people in the public galleries and museums that I work in, that's really good. That's a really good thing. I'm glad that I have that responsibility. I'm glad that all of us actually who work in those settings are thoughtful about those things, about creating situations where people can feel supported when they come forward to make disclosure, that people can feel that they can work and that they can do activities together in a way that is mutually safe from either vexatious and untrue allegations, or putting people in situations where they could be abused and there would be no witnesses. So that's what we work against. We make sure that spaces are safe, and there's a variety of practical ways that we go ahead and do these kinds of things. And that's great. I'm pleased that's in culture, because it didn't used to be. Yeah, wasn't a thing. And the point you made towards the end of what you said there, which is that about cultural change and about the moral panic. Yeah, unfortunately, the moral panic behavior, the scapegoating behavior, would seem to be an inherently human behavior. Yeah, it seems to be something that we do. We do it when we're under stress. We do it when we want a simple solution to a complex problem. Oh, look, Germany's economy is broken. Oh, it must be the Jews. Simple solution, complex problem, simple solution, kill all the Jews. That's the way we do it. That's unfortunately the way that many of us behave. And in order to deal with that, you have to do personal shadow work, to look into your own heart and your own soul and work with these things and understand them, come to terms with them and transform them. And you also have to be a guardian and a sentinel within culture, where you are picking up and you're addressing these things as they emerge, and you're really mindful and thoughtful about, okay, so there's an accusation, is there an accusation of some terrible satanic abuse that's taken place? Okay, right, well, maybe it has. It would be the first time, but maybe it has. Let's actually see what the court evidence is. Let's actually see what the investigation on the part of the police or independent legal authorities might be. Let's let that happen. Let's talk to people. Let's be open about this. Let's try and basically burst the boil and let out the pus of that kind of moral panic before it infects and poisons the body of our culture, because it has in the past, and unfortunately it might in the future. But luckily today we have more people working in this field, more awareness of the occult, more awareness of what it actually means, and more awareness of the way that abuses actually take place. And I like to think that if we maintain that pressure, that we can get to a situation where it is much, much less common than it is at the moment. I would hope.
Absolutely, because it usually starts small. Like, for instance, in 1986, the author Phil Phillips and the pastor Gary Greenwald, they claimed that shows such as Riemann, the Masters of the Universe, Thundercats, E.T., the Smurfs. They claimed that those shows were teaching kids how to practice witchcraft. So it starts small. It starts like this, oh, nobody's gonna believe that. And it grows to something horrible. So to me, this is the real monster, the ignorance, and how it goes and it spreads so fast. So we need to be aware of the culture changing, as you said. For instance, in 1990, the rock band Judas Priest was sued for over $6 million because some parents alleged that their child attempted to commit suicide because of their music. But the judge in this case ruled that there were no hidden messages, and we saw that with Marilyn Manson as well, and lots of rock bands. They were all like sued, or some people were saying they were, you know. And we have a case, for instance, in 1992, Fran and Ben Keller, they were convicted of sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl in their home daycare. Then they were sentenced to 45 years. And they were saying, you know, they were making satanic rituals like baby sacrifice, etc., etc. And after multiple appeals, only in 2013 that they were released. It took 25 years for these claims that they didn't have any evidence whatsoever to be resolved. And as you said in the beginning of what we were talking, in 2019, priests from Poland, they were burning books. They were burning Harry Potter books and other things that they considered evil forces. And there was many children in Brazil that couldn't read Harry Potter. They weren't allowed because Harry Potter was considered evil. And so, no, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, look, there's a really interesting example. So thinking about what I mentioned about the way that these things are re-understood, let's call it, to be polite, about, say, Leo Taxhill and the 10-year plus hoax that he ran. And if you think about something like Harry Potter, the Harry Potter books, whether or not you consider them good literature doesn't really matter. But fundamentally, what they're actually about is they're about how people use prejudice to destroy the lives of other people, right? So there's a whole narrative in there for anyone who's never read the books about the wizarding world, the wizards, and how that they believe that some of them believe that they should be like the sort of the Ubermensch, the superior race, and all the muggles, all the non-magical people should be these kind of slaves, and anyone who's a mudblood, anyone who's half magician and half muggle, they're kind of almost the worst of the worst. Now, this is standard stuff. This could have been written in like 1930s Germany to kind of to bring out this issue about how we other people and how we allow our prejudices to run free. So this series of books, which are about challenging prejudice, fundamentally challenging prejudice, that's what the series of books are about, and trying to understand the nature of evil and the way that evil is actually usually as a result of kind of abusive process. The books become made illegal or banned by the very belief system that has a story in it about a thing called a Good Samaritan. And the point of the story of the Good Samaritan that Christ tells is that the Samaritan is not a Jew. Right, so the Samaritan is not a member of the official religion. The point about it is to say that it's not about, you know, prejudice is one thing, but what people actually do is is what really matters. And so J.K. Rowling in her books is trying to write a series of books aimed at younger children, the younger readers primarily, which are about challenging how we become prejudiced about other people and what terrible things can flow from that. That is embedded in the heart of the Christian tradition, and yet because it involves magic and because it involves all that set dressing, that's seen as the thing that's most important. And that's actually the least significant part of the books in some respects, in terms of their message. So the other thing that kind of disturbs me about this is that what we're seeing here is not just a, we don't like you because you're a cultist and you're probably doing horrible things. It's like, actually, we don't like you because you're a cultist. We are claiming that you're doing horrible things. But actually, if you look at the stuff that you're doing, a lot of the stuff that you're interested in as a cultist are things that are radically empowering for a lot of people who have been oppressed, suppressed, and damaged throughout our culture. And that idea of banning Harry Potter, you're banning a series of books which are about how to challenge prejudice. There's a deep and terrifying irony in that for me. And what needs to happen is people need to make rational, reasonable argument. They need to make demonstration. They need to make political agitation. They need to use all the systems that they can in order to challenge those sets of ideas. And we must continue to challenge those ideas, because it's not like we're going to wake up one day and it's all going to gone away. The human scapegoating process and the prejudicial processes that we have, unfortunately, seem to be part of our biology. So we've just got to keep up the good work, sister. It's the way it goes.
Exactly.
We can do it.
The shadow work.
The shadow work.
Another thing that is happening right now, and it's happening in Brazil. In Brazil, we have a minister called Damares, and she's very close to Bolsonaro, who is the president there, which is a fascist-like meme that got elected. And anyway, so ignorance rules in Brazil. Damares, in more than one occasion, went to the TV or went to the pulpit to say that they were teaching witchcraft in the schools. And even the movie Frozen, you know, Elsa is a witch, and she, in the ending of the movie, she is alone and not kissing the prince because she's a lesbian. And the whole culture is trying to teach kids how to be witches and lesbians. And she goes on, and it's ridiculous. It is pathetic. And sometimes you don't know if you're gonna laugh or cry, because the ignorance is so absurd that you don't know how to react. And these ignorant people, they are the one ruling a country as big and as powerful as Brazil, or at least it was. It was one of the biggest economies, but right now, as we can see, because of this ignorant mentality, everything is going down. And I don't know, how can we explain this kind of mentality in 2020? Banning of books. Like, for instance, we have Rock in Rio, right? Which is a big, huge event in Brazil. Loads of rock bands come to Brazil. So when Ghost went to Brazil, one of the politicians, which is also a pastor, wanted to ban bands such as Ghost because it's mocking Christianity. So they wanted that. They want to ban Ghost and other bands and Rock in Rio from happening because of this culture ignorance. You know?
I think what's interesting there is also that it would be very easy and very straightforward to kind of create a narrative, because straightforward narratives are what many people like, and the idea of subtlety and complexity and those sorts of things are not as easy to get your head around. But it would be very easy to create a thing where it's like, occultists and pagans versus Christianity. And it's like, man, even that isn't the case, you know, because it's like there are prejudiced, fundamentalist, reactionary Christians. And there are also lots and lots of occultists who have a great deal of time and value for certainly a lot of the kind of the teachings of Jesus as outlined in some of the Gospels, and certainly the whole tradition. You know, there's many great things about that spiritual tradition. But prejudiced people are prejudiced people, whatever kind of clothing that they happen to be wearing. And it is the case that many of those prejudiced people seem to find positions within evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity easy to get into and to get into significant positions of power. I guess the story with Brazil would be the story that I would think of when I was looking back at an edition of Pagan Voice, which was published in 1994. And on the cover, there's an article about Halloween. We just had the traditional coverage in mainstream media of Halloween. And it's really interesting for me to be reading back something which is what now 26 odd years ago, something like this, and reading about how in Britain, in this country, there were various people involved in local politics, people involved in the church, saying this is an evil, satanic ceremony. We should do, you know, we need to do other things. We need to have like periods of and very often the language is interesting. One of the things was talking about seizing control of the land for Christ. I mean, what more of a militaristic kind of like style of representing things can you imagine? I mean, so this kind of conflict, this kind of thing that you're seeing in your home country in Brazil, this played out in Britain in the 90s, and people opposed it just the way that you're doing it there in Brazil. Yeah, and helping the people there resist and provide other narratives, and that will change. That will change in the same way as that it has in the British Isles. Now, if you're in Britain and you get admitted to a hospital, and they ask you what religion you are, if you say pagan, they just kind of put that down on the list. You know, no big deal, whatever. Many people are. Many people accept this. You know, it's not. And the idea that there will be a very small number of people that assume that you will be, you know, doing infanticide and killing children and abusing animals and all sorts of things. They'll still be there, but they're in the minority. And soon enough, those voices will go, and there will be a new narrative. And I hope very much, indeed, I pray and would enchant for the same story in the fabulous land of Brazil, that place too can find its way through these difficult days of prejudice and repression, and that I hope in not many years we can look back at this, and if not laugh, then at least people in positions of power can acknowledge this is what happens when prejudice is given free rein, when lack of evidence or lack of due process is considered to be okay in the face of individuals who want to scapegoat one another and want to just be haters.
Exactly. So mote be, my brother.
So mote it be. Hey, look, lovely to speak with you. We should go and do something else now.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. Thank you so much for having me here and talking about this.
Lua, it's an honor, sister. I'll catch you really soon. Loads of love.
Bye. Ciao, ciao. Bye.